give you a vernacular to discuss private equity intelligently. So in any case, typically, but again, not hard and fast. Typically, senior debt will be about 50% of the transaction. Cost of capital, in this case, meaning the interest rate, right, will be between 7 and 10%. Now, obviously, if you hear about the Fed raising interest rates by, yes.
Is it going to be LIBOR plus something?
Well, it all depends. It depends on who's lending. So when we did our deal for the maintenance, repair, and overall company in Canada, we were quoted from 2 different banks, and one was a Canadian-based bank, and they quoted everything in LIBOR plus whatever, right? So it'd be LIBOR plus 4 or whatever. So if the LIBOR right now is 4%, then it'll be an 8% rate, right? But the U.S. bank lending institution quoted everything in prime, so it'll be prime plus whatever, So prime right now, the prime rate, which is the rate that sort of a typical sound company would get, is something that's used more frequently here in the States, and so it'll be prime plus, if the prime rate is, now like 8.5, then they'll say prime plus a half, but it'll get you to the same point. Yeah. So it can be quoted in LIBOR or prime, just depending on the lender. So the cost of capital is 7-10%, and they're looking to get paid back within 5 to 7 years, typically. And so, what that means is that not necessarily that you have to take a $20 million loan and pay all of it off, but they're looking to be out of it in that time. So if you restructure the company, maybe take it back public or something, what they're expecting you to do at that time is to maybe bring in some equity to pay them down, or at least just get a new lender. So their book is closed on it. They made their money and they're out. So that's what the expectation there is. And they're usually not going to go beyond 3 times, like I said, this is just a common thing in private equity, 3 times EBITDA, that EBITDA number. And so, again, you're looking at insurance companies, commercial lenders, commercial banks. This is the type of financing that all the guys that we bank with do. It's not a high-flying, this isn't the high-flying area of it, This is sort of the more standardized piece, So if you were working in this area, you'd be at a large bank in their leveraged finance group. You see what I'm saying? Again, working closely with investment bankers, working closely with, guys with private equity funds because you're essentially lending the funds money. Working closely with the, a lot of times with the managements if they're actually buying their own companies that they currently run. And again, for the mezzanine level, this is going to be a smaller percent of the transaction, but like I said, still very important. It's going to be 20 to 30% of the transaction. But it's very important because it's usually making up like a missing piece. So there's the equity in the transaction and there's a senior debt. And that's not going to be much different than what you would typically, sort of typically see. Typical company. Most companies have some bank debt out there, and every company has equity holders, right? But it's this piece that's really where the leverage gets aggressive. Where you start pushing the company to its limits as far as what it can pay down in cash flow. And so this is usually only going to be 20 to 30% of the deal. The cost of capital is going to be much higher. The interest rates are going to be as much as 20%. Just very aggressive. And this is they set this at a 7 to 10 year payback, right? Now again, that's usually done by taking that out with equity or using cash flow to pay this down. They can set the payback at 7 to 10 years because they know you're going to get rid of that first. So, again, it's just like, you come out of school, come out of grad school, come out of your undergrad, you're not going to pay your student loan off first. You're going to pay your credit cards off first, if they're at a 20% rate, you're going to pay stuff down according to how much interest is costing. And again, this is usually going to be 1 to 2 times EBITDA is what they'll advance. And again, there's going to be specific LBO and mezzanine funds like Stonehenge, like American Capital, like what's another one? Capital Source is another one. CIBC does a lot of this types of lending. So you're also going to be able to get this from the public markets. So I talked, one of the reasons that Credit Suisse bought my old firm, DLJ, was because they're high yield business. So high yield or junk bonds, were how in the 80s and 90s were how a lot of these deals were paid for. So literally, these funds would issue bonds, in order to pay for these deals, on the assumption that there was going to be enough changes in the companies to pay down the bonds, or enough cash in the books of the companies they were buying to pay down the bonds or what have you. But they would literally, just issue bonds totally around a deal. That's less common now, because they had a lot of those bond deals blow up when companies weren't able to pay them. But it is still, a potential option. Okay, so equity. So this is going to usually be 20 to 30% of the transaction. Back in the 80s and 90s, when LBOs were really hot, the largest LBO deal that had happened to date in the 80s was RJR Nabisco, the buyout of that company by Kohlberg, Kravitz, and Roberts, KKR. And so, that deal would have been like 7% equity, right? So not a lot of skin in the game, just a lot of debt. And so when those deals started blowing up, people got really, people really backed off of these like really highly levered deals, and basically said, well, look, you got to have skin in the game of at least, 20 or 30% here, and then the rest be debt. So the cost of capital here for equity is 25 to 40%. Now there's no interest rate on equity, right? But what cost of capital here means, or refers to, is the expected rate of return that equity investors want. And that's all equity investors. So LBO funds, yes, but then also management teams that put money in. Like I said, on this deal we're working on in Canada, we brought a management team in, right? So they expect that their piece of the company is going to appreciate, by X amount. These guys work, work now for huge defense companies. So the $750,000 they get every year in salary is, nothing. What they're looking at is what is their piece of the company? How is that going to grow? Because that's where the real money is for them. And so, so the cost of capital for equity for the equity stakeholders is usually between 25 and 40%. And the exit strategy there, the time you expect the investment to pay off is usually 4 to 6 years. You could say 3 to 7, or but usually you're not going to get out in more than 3, and you don't want to be in an investment for more than 7. It's if you can help it. So again, sources